On the 24th of January 2026, the Pentagon quietly released a document that looked, at first glance, like a routine update. But this time, what mattered was not only what the document said, but also what it quietly pushed into the background. On the surface, it appeared to be another technical defense strategy. In reality, it signaled something deeper, a subtle but meaningful shift in how the United States is redefining its role in the world. Normally, documents like a National Defense Strategy update are long, bureaucratic, and easy for the public to ignore. They are usually discussed only among specialists, but this one carried a different weight. Between the lines, it reflected a changing view inside Washington about global responsibility, alliance commitments, and what the United States now considers truly essential. That is what made this document more than just another policy paper. At first glance, NATO, Europe, and traditional alliance language were still there. On paper, continuity was preserved. The familiar commitments had not disappeared. But when the language was examined closely, the tone felt different. Certain regions were treated with less emphasis. Some commitments were described in broader, more flexible terms. In geopolitics, the strongest signals are often not in what is loudly repeated, but in what quietly loses priority. This document carried exactly that kind of signal. Only days after the strategy was released, reports emerged that U.S. officials had privately told allies to prepare for greater burden sharing. These messages were not delivered in dramatic public speeches. They were communicated in closed-door meetings and diplomatic channels. That matters, because private conversations often reveal real intentions more clearly than public statements. The quiet nature of these messages suggested a deliberate and carefully managed transition rather than a sudden policy break. At the same time, the language coming out of Washington began to shift. Instead of leading, officials increasingly spoke about supporting. Instead of guaranteeing, they emphasized protecting U.S. territory and core interests first. On the surface, this may sound like a minor wording change. In strategic policy, it is not. Major shifts usually begin with language. First, the words change. Then the budgets. Then troop deployments. Then finally, political priorities. This pattern has repeated throughout modern history. This was not presented as a formal retreat. The United States continued to state its commitment to allies. But when those statements were read alongside discussions of reviewing overseas deployments, a broader repositioning became visible. The real question was no longer just where U.S. forces were stationed. It was which regions Washington now considered truly indispensable. This pointed toward a more selective and more inward-focused security posture, different from the post-Cold War model of global leadership. What made this shift especially important was that the strategy was not only about Europe or China. At its core, it was about redefining what the United States is willing to prioritize, and ultimately, what it is willing to fight for. In that sense, the document was more than a military plan. It was a political and strategic map of priorities. Homeland defense and the Western Hemisphere were placed more clearly at the center. This marked a gradual departure from decades of global first thinking. The increased emphasis on places like the Panama Canal, Greenland, border security, and domestic defense production stood out. These priorities suggest a security framework focused more on direct American interests and geographic proximity. That differs from the long-standing role of the United States as the ultimate guarantor of global security. A more limited, more calculated, and more interest-driven model is taking shape. The implicit message is becoming clearer. If an issue does not directly affect U.S. territory or core strategic influence, it may no longer automatically rank at the very top. For many allies, this represents a major psychological shift. For decades, defense planning in many countries was built on the assumption of permanent American backing. That assumption shaped military spending, force structures, and even political decision-making. Now, that foundation is being quietly re-examined. For Europe, this is not just a technical adjustment. It challenges a long-standing belief, the idea that the United States would always be there. That belief allowed many European countries to delay major investments in their own military capabilities. It influenced budgets, force readiness, and strategic planning. Now, without a dramatic announcement, that assumption is being rewritten, not through one shock, but through a series of small signals. That makes the uncertainty even greater, because allies are left to interpret gradual changes instead of clear declarations. In European capitals, this has already begun to reshape political debates. Defense spending increases, and discussions of a more autonomous European defense capability are returning to the center of the agenda. But these debates also expose internal divisions. Some countries push for rapid rearmament. Others worry about the economic and political costs. The result could be a more fragmented European security landscape with uneven levels of preparedness and commitment. From China's perspective, this is not a simple American retreat. The United States still views China as a strategic competitor. The Indo-Pacific remains a key theater. But the nature of the competition appears to be changing. Instead of global leadership across every front, Washington seems to be moving toward a more selective and interest-based rivalry. This suggests a shift away from trying to lead everywhere at once, toward choosing specific arenas more carefully. This creates a dual effect for Beijing. On one hand, a more limited U.S. global posture could open space for China to expand influence in certain regions. On the other hand, a more focused U.S. strategy in the Indo-Pacific could make competition there more intense and more direct. That could lead to a world where power competition is more regional, more fragmented, and more unpredictable. For smaller and mid-sized allies, the message becomes increasingly complex. Protection no longer feels automatic. It becomes more conditional. Those conditions can include political alignment, defense spending levels, and willingness to share regional responsibilities. This introduces new pressures, more obligations, more uncertainty, and greater strategic risk for countries that relied heavily on guaranteed external support. If this trend continues, European states may face faster rearmament, higher defense budgets, and a more fragmented regional security structure. The consequences would not be limited to the military domain. Higher defense spending often means trade-offs, pressure on social programs, political debates over priorities, economic tensions over resource allocation. Security choices would increasingly shape domestic politics. None of this means the United States is about to disappear from the global stage. The U.S. remains the most powerful military and political actor in the world. Its influence will not vanish in the near term. But the rules of the game appear to be changing quietly. The critical question is no longer only where the United States is present. It is also where it is willing to accept being less present. That shift alone reshapes the strategic reality for allies. In geopolitics, perception often moves faster than official policy. Allies begin to interpret small moves as signals of larger future changes. These perceptions can spread faster than formal decisions and can have real consequences. While global attention may remain focused on China, the deeper transformation may lie in how the United States now defines its own responsibilities. When a superpower slowly stops seeing itself as the world's ultimate insurer, the world does not automatically become safer. Power vacuums emerge, uncertainty grows, new rivalries take shape. The system becomes more fragile, more divided, and harder to predict. The shift may be quiet, but its long-term impact could be profound. This is why this moment matters beyond any single document or any single administration. Strategic transitions of this scale rarely unfold in a straight line. They move through ambiguity, mixed signals, and gradual recalibration. What appears today as a technical adjustment can, over time, harden into a new strategic reality. Allies, competitors, and markets will all respond not only to what Washington officially declares, but to what they believe these quiet shifts ultimately mean. Over time, those beliefs can become self-fulfilling, reshaping behavior, investment, and security planning in ways that reinforce the very changes they anticipate. In that sense, the document is not just a snapshot of current policy. It is a signal of how the global order itself may be slowly and quietly being redefined.